The rain had not stopped for 3 days, turning the dirt roads into rivers of mud and the bombed-out buildings into dripping skeletons of concrete and steel. It was the kind of place where sound carried strangely, where a single misplaced step could echo into the ruins and give away your position. In that silence, broken only by the patter of water and the occasional distant crack of gunfire, Lieutenant Cara Holt moved like a shadow. She was young, her face still carrying the traces of a smile that war had long since buried, but her eyes were sharp, steady, and cold. She carried only what she needed, an M4 carbine stripped of excess, a combat knife strapped tight against her thigh, and a satchel with maps, rations, and one final charge of C4, enough to bring down a building or turn a corner of the battlefield into hell itself. The mission had been clear when it started. Infiltrate the enemy's rear lines, sabotage their supply depots, and disappear before dawn. But war never followed the neatness of orders. Somewhere between the second warehouse explosion and the third stolen transmission, the enemy had realized that a lone ghost was moving through their territory. Now the hunter had become the hunted. Enemy patrols spread across the countryside, drones scanning with infrared, dogs trained to track by scent. And somewhere in their ranks, Cara knew, was the kind of tracker who wouldn't stop until he put his boot on her neck. She paused in the shell of an old cathedral, its stained glass windows shattered into jagged knives of color. She lowered herself to one knee and traced her gloved fingers across the stone floor, remembering the words of Colonel John Glenn. The challenge is not to go where no one has gone before, but to return with honor. She was not lost, and she was not afraid. SEALs did not allow fear to run ahead of them. They carried it, locked tight in their chest, until the time came to break it loose as fury. From the broken archways of the cathedral, she could see the flicker of flashlights moving along the road. Enemy soldiers, 6 of them sweeping methodically. They were close, far too close. She adjusted her breathing, every inhale measured, every exhale controlled. The carbine rested against her shoulder, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine what Colonel Buzz Aldrin had once said about pressure. You don't rise to the occasion. You fall back on your training. Training was the bedrock beneath her boots now. Training was the only thing standing between her and the tightening circle of enemies. She shifted to higher ground, climbing the remains of the bell tower. Her movements were deliberate, silent, precise. From there she could watch the soldiers fan out, their rifles cutting through the rain, their voices hushed. She did not fire, not yet. Ammunition was too precious, and killing them would only signal where she was. This was not about fighting every enemy. It was about surviving long enough to deliver what she carried, the coordinates of a hidden weapons cache that, if destroyed, would cripple the enemy's advance. Cara touched the small notebook pressed to her chest, where those coordinates were scribbled. The mission was no longer about sabotage alone. It was about carrying knowledge that could turn the tide of battles yet to come. Her pursuers did not know what she held, but they knew she could not be allowed to live. That was enough to keep them relentless. The rain picked up, hammering against the tin roofs of ruined houses and drowning out distant sounds. Cara closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She thought of Colonel Charles Young, who had once stood in the face of impossible odds and declared that courage was not the absence of fear, but the will to act in spite of it. That was what she carried in her heart now. Not survival, not vengeance, but will. She descended from the bell tower and disappeared into the ruins once more. Somewhere out there the enemy hunted her, believing they could break her spirit, believing that exhaustion, fear, and steel would drive her into a corner. They did not know the truth yet. They did not know that Navy SEALs never retreat. The night grew heavier as Lieutenant Cara Holt pressed deeper into the shattered cityscape, every step a careful negotiation between concealment and speed. The rain-slicked stone glistened under faint moonlight, reflecting the occasional flash of tracer rounds in the far distance. For hours she had slipped through alleys and tunnels, staying ahead of her pursuers, but she could feel the noose tightening. The enemy had learned her rhythm, studying her tactics, spreading wider with each sweep. What began as squads of 6 became entire units, dozens combing through ruins with floodlights and dogs. The hunters had begun to move like she did, quiet, patient, methodical. They wanted her alive, or so their restraint suggested. Yet Cara knew enough of war to understand that alive didn't mean safe. Her radio hissed with static. She whispered a code phrase into it, praying for an answer, but the line remained dead. No reinforcements. No command center. No escape route waiting. She was alone with only her training and the knowledge that if she failed, the coordinates pressed against her chest would be lost, and with them, the advantage her unit had bled for. By dawn, exhaustion had become a second skin. Hunger bit at her stomach, and the weight of her weapon felt heavier with every stride. She had taken shelter in the husk of a burned-out schoolhouse when the first turning point came. A soft shuffle of boots on the second floor above her. Not one, but many. She realized too late the enemy had anticipated her path. The trap was sprung. Glass shattered as flares ignited, filling the rooms with harsh white light. Shouts rang out, rifles clattered, and Cara dove through a collapsed wall. Hitting the mud outside as bullets chewed the ground around her, she ran, vaulting through rubble, breath sharp in her lungs, until she found herself cornered in a courtyard. A single soldier broke from the pack, sprinting forward with a blade in hand, certain he had her pinned. Cara dropped her rifle, drew her knife, and the fight was fast, brutal, silent. When it was done, she stood over the body, blood mixing with the rain, her chest heaving. She didn't look at the man's face. She couldn't afford to. But she whispered a single word, a habit picked up from Lieutenant Audie Murphy's stories: respect. Even enemies deserved it. Her escape was narrow, but it had cost her more than she expected. Ammunition had been spent, her cover blown, her strength wearing thin. And worse, she had left behind the body of a fallen SEAL brother, Sergeant Daniels, who had been captured and used as bait for her. She had recognized his voice calling out from the schoolhouse before the ambush. The enemy had executed him moments later. Betrayal and rage warred within her chest, but she forced them down. Grief was a weapon her enemy wanted her to carry. She would not give them that victory. As dusk bled across the sky, Cara found herself in the ruins of a factory. The silence pressed in, and for a heartbeat she believed she had lost them. Then came the growl of engines, armored vehicles rolling down the street, floodlights cutting through the gloom. The scale of the hunt had escalated. She was no longer a single target. She was their war. Every man, every weapon, every resource had been redirected to bring her down. Her hands trembled as she rigged the C4 to a cracked support beam, sweat mixing with rain as she worked. She thought of Colonel William Billy Mitchell's defiance against all odds, of Colonel Eileen Collins's calm under pressure, and she steadied herself. The explosion ripped through the night, collapsing half the factory and scattering enemy troops in a maelstrom of dust and fire. She slipped out amid the chaos, lungs burning, ears ringing. Yet even in victory, her situation worsened. Her last explosive was gone. Ammunition dwindled to a handful of rounds. Her body ached with fatigue, and the city offered fewer and fewer places to hide. Each encounter carved away at her resources until all she had left was grit. Still, she pressed on, the memory of fallen comrades like ghosts urging her forward. She felt the weight of sacrifice, the sting of betrayal, but she refused to let it break her. If she was to fall, it would not be running. It would be standing, fighting, enduring. For that was the creed carved into her very bones. Navy SEALs never retreat. The last night came with no moon, only the dim silver of clouds drifting across a wounded sky. Cara Holt crouched in the gutted remains of a warehouse, her body bruised, her uniform torn, her rifle stripped down to its last magazine. Every movement throbbed with pain, every breath carried the weight of exhaustion. Yet her eyes remained fierce, the same eyes that had refused surrender from the very beginning. She had been hunted for days across this ruin of a city, driven into corners and blasted out of cover. But still she stood, still she fought. The enemy thought they had her surrounded, that dawn would bring her capture. They did not know that dawn would bring her decision. When the engines rumbled and the searchlights swept once more, Cara pressed her hand to the small notebook on her chest. The coordinates inside were safe, indestructible in their simplicity. She had already memorized them, carved them into her mind as if written in fire. If she fell, the mission could still live through her sacrifice. That thought gave her strength. She thought of Colonel Anna May Hayes, the first female general who had carried courage not as armor, but as a duty. She thought of Lieutenant John F. Kennedy pulling wounded men from burning water, of Lieutenant Audie Murphy standing alone on a blazing tank to hold a line no one thought could be held. Their legacy ran like a current through her veins. The enemy closed in, boots hammering, rifles ready. Cara exhaled, steadying her heartbeat, and raised her weapon. The first shots cracked the night, sharp and unflinching. She moved between pillars and shadows, every burst precise, every round counted. Soldiers fell, others shouted orders, the factory floor lit with muzzle flashes and screams. But the tide was too strong. For every enemy she cut down, more surged forward. A bullet grazed her shoulder, another tore through her pack. She dropped to one knee, blood dripping into the dust. Then came the thunder. Not her rifle, not their rifles, but the roar of helicopters cutting through the storm. Figures rappelled down ropes, shadows moving with lethal speed. Navy SEALs, her brothers and sisters, had arrived. For days she had been the hunted, but she had never been alone. They swept into the fight with brutal precision, overwhelming the stunned enemy. The hunted became the hammer, and the enemy line crumbled in panic. Within minutes, the courtyard was theirs, smoke and silence the only witnesses to the end. Cara slumped against a wall, breath ragged, weapon resting across her knees. A hand gripped her shoulder, steady, firm, familiar. Lieutenant Edward Butch O'Hare knelt beside her, his voice steady in the chaos. "You carried the fire, Holt Green. You didn't retreat and you didn't break. That's what makes you one of us." She tried to answer, but words failed, swallowed by exhaustion. All she could do was nod, clutching the notebook that had cost her so much. In the days that followed, the coordinates she carried led to the destruction of the enemy's hidden weapons cache. Entire offensives crumbled before they could begin. Hundreds of soldiers lived because she endured. The mission was recorded as a triumph of intelligence and bravery, but the full truth of her ordeal, the hunger, the blood, the solitude, the grief, would never make its way into official reports. Some victories lived only in the scars of those who survived them. Back at base, as she stood beneath the rising flag, Cara thought of the comrades she had lost, of Sergeant Daniels whose life was cut short, of the legends whose courage had guided her. She knew she had returned changed. Not broken, but reshaped, hardened by fire. She had carried not only a mission, but a legacy, and she would pass that weight forward to the next warrior who needed it. The story of that night spread quietly, whispered among SEALs and soldiers, told not as glory but as truth, that one of their own had faced an entire army and never backed down. It was a reminder, etched into memory, of the creed that bound them together. Because in the end, she had proven it with every breath, every drop of blood, every step through the storm. Navy SEALs never retreat.
I just want to take a moment to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you. Folded hands, your love, support, likes, comments, and subscriptions mean the world to me. Without you, this journey wouldn't be possible. Every view, every share, and every encouraging word keeps me motivated to create more content for you all. I'm truly grateful to have such an amazing community by my side. Let's keep growing together and making this journey even more special. Red Heart.